Before we start, I want to say thank you to Louis and his team for being so consistent in organizing such a wonderful conference. I was on stage here in 2013. I think we also had technical issues. At the first edition, I was there in 2017. I think I was there in 2022. And now I'm back, and I love this format. So today, let me tell you why this year is unlike any other year and why you can just do things. You know what they say? A picture says more than 1,000 words. These are my GitHub commit statistics. Something happened in April, something significant. And to explain that, I actually have to give you a little bit about my backstory. So I started doing iOS very early on, when we still had manual memory management, and core data was just in beta for the upcoming iPhone OS 3. I built my own apps, Apple killed them, I freelanced, and eventually I started my own company with the beautiful name PS PDF Kit. And over the next 12 years, we became the leader in the PDF space. I poured all my hard blood into this. I bootstrapped the company. We became 70 employees eventually, and then I sold it in 2021. And you know, I should have been really happy about this. This was one of the biggest exits in Austria. I never have to work again. But I was utterly broken, burned out. I had no purpose, and I was filling my emptiness with wine and parties, also drugs. Around that time, Microsoft released Copilot. And you know, I both have to give them credit for creating the first large-scale coding assistant back in 2021. And at the same time, I wonder what happened, because it took pretty much until now for Copilot to become kind of good. And a year later, in 2022, ChatGPT was released. I remember giving it a try shortly, and I found it kind of cool, but didn't pay much attention. And then we got GPT-4 in early 2023. And then 4 Omni was released in May 2024. And just a few weeks ago, we got GPT-5. And also, we're just celebrating 1 year of thinking models. So o1 was released in December 2024, replaced by o3 Mini and o3 and o4 Mini, which also have been replaced by GPT-5, which is a unified model that can infer with or without reasoning.
So you need to have a product, have a company. And we had this model called GPT-3, and we were trying, I was turning up the urgency on the company to figure out a product, and we just couldn't. It wasn't good enough. It was cool, but it wasn't good enough to make something that worked. And I remember that Paul Graham had this advice that always stuck with me, which is you should always make an API. No matter what, you should make an API. It's just, there's good stuff will happen.
Yeah, I guess good stuff did happen for them. So while they were making ChatGPT, what was I doing? Hoping my clicker works. Here we go. Yeah, and I found this tweet from a year ago. I don't think Renaud is here today, but I just found it hilarious. Yeah, he was right. Back then, I didn't spend a single neuron on UIKit or SwiftUI. Burnout is real. Take it serious. It took me a lot of therapy, ayahuasca, and patience to find my way back. I moved countries. I figured out that happiness doesn't come from moving countries from within. And then, pretty much 5 months ago, one morning I woke up and something felt different. My spark was back. And you know the feeling when you create something out of nothing? Douglas Crockford, the guy who formalized the JavaScript object notation, JSON, he sums it up perfectly.
Programmers are like gods. not big gods, but, pathetic little gods, because they have the power of creation. By typing in a series of words and symbols, they can cause something to come to life. And it has behavior, and it may behave in interesting ways. And only we can do that. And when you start learning how to do that, I think it changes you.
It does. There is one thing I would phrase differently. And that's the word programmers. Such a limiting term. We are builders. And I'm sure I can speak for all of us here. The fact alone that we all travel to Logroño, and let's be fair, it's not the easiest place to get to, shows that we love creating software. And now, in 2025, everything's different. The software industry is at an inflection point, unlike anything in its brief history. So it's only natural that generative AI can feel a bit scary. Here's this new technology that is becoming better at an uncanny rate. Will we still have a job in 5 years? NVIDIA CEO and co-founder Jensen Huang sums it up pretty well.
Every job will be affected. Some jobs will be lost, some jobs will be created, but every job will be affected. And immediately, it is unquestionable, you're not going to lose your job to an AI, but you're going to lose your job to somebody who uses AI.
It's only been 7 months ago until Andrej Karpathy, the co-founder of OpenAI, he coined the term vibe coding. Vibe coding is where you fully give into the vibes, you embrace the exponentials, you forget that the code even exists. It's possible because LLMs are getting too good. Just talk to the composer with Super Whisper or whatever, barely touch the keyboard. I ask for the dumbest things like decrease padding because I'm too lazy to find it. I accept all. I don't read the diffs. When I get an error message, I just copy-paste it in with no command. Usually, that fixes it. The code grows beyond comprehension. Sometimes the LLM can't fix a bug, so I just work around it. Or I ask it for a random change until it goes away. It's not really coding. It's just I see stuff, I say stuff, I run stuff, I copy-paste stuff, and it mostly works. And you know what? Countless companies build business models around this. The two biggest ones alone, Replit and Lovable, have a combined valuation of $5 billion. Is this where our profession is headed? Can we just throw away everything we learned in university and just vibe our way new projects? What about craftsmanship, quality? Now, this was in February. Let's look what happened this year alone. And yes, the year starts off with a banger. NVIDIA lost around 600 billion in market cap on a single day, as the markets learned that you actually need far fewer chips to create state-of-the-art models with the release of the first significant Chinese open weights model, DeepSeek R1. But not to worry, the stock gained around $1.2 trillion since then, so we're all good. The pace of AI models released this year alone has been, there's not a word, relentless. I tried to fit in the most significant roles, but I actually had to skip a lot of them. So it started out with the thinking models. Then we got DeepSeek. In February, we got Gemini 2, Grok 3, Claude 3.7, the first beta release of Claude Code, and GPT 4.5. All of them are already deprecated again. It's all old stuff. In April, we got Llama 4. It's kind of a downer. GPT 4.1, O3, O4 Mini. They're all deprecated again. It's all old stuff again. And Codex, a version of Codex that they wrote in TypeScript. But they also dropped that. They rewrote it in Rust. And then in May, my birthday, we got Claude 4, Claude Code, the actual GA release, DeepSeek R1, a version that is much better than the original one. In summer, we got Gemini Pro 2.5, Grok 4, sequence recoder, GLM, and Kimi. So this is kind of like the time where the Chinese model are raising and getting really good. In August, we got Claude 4.1, DeepSeek 3.1, and then Elon Musk with his Grok Code Fast 1, which actually is pretty good. And September, we got a new version of Kimi that's now pretty much as good as Claude Sonnet. And 2 days ago, GPT-5 Coda. So I had to update my slides because one day in AI is like 1 week in real world.
What a decade, huh?
Captain, it's still 2025.
Yeah, that's kind of shit, but I just dragged in this comic into Google's Veo, and it made this, and it also makes the audio now. So that's how far we come in generative AI. That took me like 5 minutes. So how can we measure how good these models are getting at coding? So the most popular benchmark is called SVE Bench, and it's kind of cool. They took 500 actual GitHub issues from 12 popular Python repositories. It's Python, but it doesn't matter because models are pretty good in all languages. So you give this model access to the terminal and the GitHub issue, and then you let them fix the issue. If the issue is fixed, there's tests for it, they get a point, otherwise they don't. In the beginning of the year, we were at 20% solve rate with GPT-4 Omni. That means out of those 500 tickets, it was able to solve 100. And now, just 7 months later, we are at 75% success rate with GPT-5 and Claude Opus 4.1. That's 375 out of 500 tickets solved without any actual input from a human, just by giving them the terminal and the ticket. If you add a full harness, if you give those models access to Google, they get to 85% and more. So again, this happened only this year, and I think that's really significant. Now, I have to be correct, because nothing's ever easy. The numbers are a tiny bit off, because the models actually got too smart. They got caught cheating. So some of those very latest models, they started looking at the Git history and figured out that somebody already fixed the issue, because of course time doesn't stand still. So they actually looked at the future and then just took how it was fixed and like copied it to their task. But it only happened in like 8 out of 500 tasks, so it doesn't change the number significantly. It just shows that those models are getting really clever and that benchmarks are hard. 2 other notable things is that Anthropic was really ahead of the game. Claude 3.7 had a 50% cross rate back in February. And those open weight models, you have to call them open weight, not open source, because we don't know how they've been created. They're now on par almost with models from just a few months ago. So in my opinion, it's no longer a question if China will like push ahead. The question is more like, will it happen in 2026 or 2027? And I talked to many people who tried generative AI in the last few years, and they dismissed it. It's not good enough. And they were all right. Up until a few months ago, AI wasn't really good. We just reached a tipping point in May. And there's a few components in the industry that all had to be right to make this happen. Of course, there's raw model intelligence. There is the tool use. And there's also the agent harness that keeps the model in check, manages to-do lists, and gives it system reminders. And Claude Code was the first one that got this right, and it changed the game. And if you took a moment and marveled that process, how much happened just this year, maybe take a second and imagine how things will be in 5 years from now. If today's trend continues, and there's not a lot of indicator why it wouldn't, we will see some extreme outcomes. Google DeepMind, they commissioned a report that predicts the future based on historical trends. And the most significant argument for a slowdown, the most significant argument actually is that we might run out of electrical power. But that's something that's solvable with money and time. Another argument that came up is that we might run out of human-generated text because those models, they eat all the books and all the text that they can get. But we actually have enough until at least 2027, and synthetic data has been more successful than initially expected. Yeah, so back to my story. When I found my spark again and I come back from my slumber, I wanted to continue on a side project that I started in 2021. I used SwiftUI, GeoDB, and I built an app that aggregates data from Twitter and shows you some interesting insights about the people you follow. I built it in SwiftUI. And because that was new, or newish at the time, I hit so many roadblocks. Navigation was buggy, UI was sluggish, it was a mess. And I mean, what did I expect? I used SwiftUI on the Mac in 2021. Now, 4 years later, it still has problems. And I knew, back then I already knew that the better choice for this app would have been web tech, because I could just greatly increase my target audience, I mean, duh, and I needed one big fat database, not SQLite slices per target user. But there was just one problem. Like I didn't really know how to build great web apps. I mean, of course I can learn it, but you know the feeling when you are really good at one thing and suddenly you should go to this other galaxy and you feel like a complete idiot again that has to Google everything? Ugh. I call this the competency trap. So when I started rebuilding my project, I didn't want to feel like a noob again. And that was my main motivation for taking a deep look into generative AI. Oh, suddenly I have this buddy here that never gets tired of my dumb questions and that actually can pretty much code everything I want for me. Awesome. So what I did is I took all my existing work on SwiftUI, I converted it into one big file, one big Markdown file. I dragged it into Gemini, into Google's AI Studio. I asked it to write me a spec from the source code. I dragged the spec back into Cloud Code, and then told it, build in TypeScript. And it was looping for many hours. And eventually, within a single day, I had a somewhat working web app. I mean, it was total slop, but it worked. I could log in and I could see something. And now this is a long road to go from this piece of junk to a working project, but I had something I could play with it. And to me, that felt incredibly empowering and motivating. So I came back into this world where the tools were just about good enough. And while my first steps into vibe coding were a mess, I improved my skills and I started getting better results. And then Opus 4 came out, and suddenly we reached that point where the tools were good enough to build just about anything. And it's not just about the tools. Agentic engineering is a skill. It's like any other skill that you have to master. It's like going to the gym. The first time it's going to suck. It's hard. You might have to force yourself. But after a few times, you feel the results. It gets easier, and you start to enjoy it. So as you use those tools more, you develop an intuition for how to use them. What's the right size for a change? How to prompt so I get a good outcome? What's context engineering? What to add and to clear? How do I parallelize my work? How do I approach reviews? How do I plan bigger tasks? Don't expect to be good at this right away. And also note that initially we used the term vibe coding. These days, I actually consider that a slur. If you want to build something, you will still have to read code. You have to think hard about high-level design, dependencies, distributed systems, and so on. This is called agentic engineering, and there's still a lot of craft that you need. So somewhere around May, as these tools got really good and my skills improved, my obsession reached an unhealthy level. And as builders, I'm sure you can relate. And, I have so many ideas I want to build, but software is complex and things take time. So I have to be selective where I put in my time and my energy. Most of my ideas never see the light of day. And then suddenly there's this new magical tool that can write code faster than I could ever do, that can break down high-level descriptions into something that mostly works. That feeling when you can just do things. And I'll give you an example. For my Mac apps, I wanted a simple service to track downloads and macOS usage statistics. And I remembered that Sparkle has this report built in, like every time it does an update request, it sends the usage stats. However, there wasn't really a great open source solution out there that would help me track these. Most people use analytics SDKs that track all kind of things, but everything I built was open source and it just felt so intrusive. I just wanted something lightweight. So I just wiped my own. And this is absolute slop. I didn't look at the code at all. But it works. It solved my immediate need, and I could build something in 3 hours on the side, my secondary screen, without giving it much attention. It gets the job done, and I can always make it better if it becomes more important to me. And before AI, I would never even have considered building this myself. And now it was just a few prompts. Another example is LLM codes. Apple has this brilliant idea of using lots of JavaScript in the online documentation. And it looks great, and it's totally unusable for agents. Because they try to fetch the page, but they don't have a complete browser. So all they see is a shitload of JavaScript, but not the actual documentation that they need. So I built a website scraper that converts Apple Docs, or actually any documentation page really, into one big Markdown file. And then I can use that Markdown file, I can drag it into my agent, so it really knows what APIs are there and how to use those APIs. So I open sourced all of these projects, so you can also use them whenever you need up-to-date docs for your agents. And again, I would have never bothered building this before AI. It's just too much work, especially because I'm not a master in web stuff yet. Sure, I could have built a Mac app, but even that would have probably taken me a week, not a day on the side. So it's kind of hard to describe how excited I was, and I still am about the possibilities that you have an idea and you just build it. I was radiating with excitement, and I hooked up a lot of my friends on this new drug. And when I texted them at 5 a.m. in the morning, they responded immediately. So then when I jokingly called them the Black Eye Club, and the struggle is real, the level of serotonin you get when your agent one-shots yet another prompt is kind of insane. In one interview, I called agents catnip for developers, but really it's more like crack cocaine. They have a slot machine-like dynamic where your brain can't figure out if something will work beforehand or not. So you really have this unpredictable incentive that is very addictive. Somebody made a high-score board for Cloud Code. It calculates all the sessions and all your tokens and the hypothetical price if you would pay for API pricing, and I've been first place for quite a while there. And Tariq, he's one of the engineers who actually is building Cloud Code. He hit a nail that agentic engineering can actually give you the same feeling as a video game. So this obsession also led me to create a meetup. I call it Cloud Code Anonymous. I started it together with Orta, you know the Orta from CocoaPods. And we wanted to create a space for people to talk about their experience. And also understanding that for some people, it can be hard to speak publicly. The first one was in London, and since then we have Vienna, Berlin, San Francisco, New York. Now, why did we create this space? Because there's still quite a few people who loudly reject the idea that this is now possible, that you can build software without actually writing code yourself. And I've been attacked and accused of lying quite a few times on social media. And I always found it very curious because everything I do is open source. You can look at the commits, you can look at everything I do, and those people still didn't believe me. So I guess some people just don't want to look at the evidence. But lately, these voices have become more quiet. More people discover just how much changed this year. And I did notice there's a certain group of people whose eyes start to glow and eventually look sleep-deprived when they start their agentic journey. And there are others who don't care that much. There's this phenomenal blog post by Justin Searles in which he's been asking the same question. What factors predict where somebody is an overzealous AI booster or a radicalized AI skeptic? And he realized developers who embrace AI tend to be more creative, more result-oriented, and have good product taste. Meanwhile, the dissenters are more likely to code for the sake of coding, expect to be handled crystal clear requirements, or otherwise want a job to conform to a routine 9-to-5 grind. The former group feels unchained by those tools, and the latter group feels threatened just as often. In order to succeed in this new world, you want to be a full breadth developer, somebody with both technical and product capabilities. And what's the difference in those developers is it's less about capabilities and more about mindset. They are results-oriented. They may enjoy coding, but they like getting shit done even more. They are methodical. When they encounter a problem, they experiment and iterate until they arrive at a solution. The best among them are visionaries. They don't wait to be told what to work on. They identify opportunities. That others don't see. And they dream of software no one else has imagined. And you know what? That's great for freelancers and smaller companies. And it's bad news for corporations like Google. They're even suggesting that a single person might drive both product and technical execution would be absurd. So up until a few months ago, the best developers played the violin. Today, they play the orchestra. Now, with agentic engineering, you move up one level of abstraction. English is becoming your new programming language, which in turn also means the actual programming language matters less. What, however, matters is the amount of available training data for the LLM. In my view, the best language models are Python, JavaScript, and Go. Swift works pretty well, but it will take more loops, especially if you try Swift 6. So your experience will not be as good yet as one of the top-tier languages. So, and I hope nobody kills me for that, next time when you might consider Swift on the server, maybe try a different language. Go has low language churn, a great ecosystem, a fast compiler, and it works really well with agents. Apple really didn't do the language much good by causing so much churn, and especially with strict concurrency. Like, consider the Mac app that I built. It's built in Tauri. That's somewhat similar to Electron, but it uses WebKit under the hood instead of Chromium. So the DMG you download is just a few megabytes. And resizing is actually smoother than in most complex Swift UI apps. For anything that needs a deeper system integration, I just wrote a Rust plugin that allows me to load Swift. and then I write everything, or my agent writes everything in Swift directly. As a bonus, it also runs on Windows and Linux. I mean, not as good as on macOS, because I just put in less care. But in general, those folks have lower expectations on native apps anyhow. Personally, I find the process of learning a new programming language and framework in a project where I actually use it incredibly fun. It's far more motivating than working through tutorials or, God behold, books. And the beauty is, if I later discover, oh, this wasn't the right choice after all, I can just prompt the LLM to rewrite it in a different language or framework. Agentic engineering shifts your mindset when it comes to experimentation. Let me give you another example. One of my projects is Peekaboo. It's like an MCP where you can make screenshots on the Mac without any user interaction for your agent. It's an MCP because back then I didn't know any better, but structurally it's built that there is a TypeScript wrapper for the MCP, and then the CLI is a Swift app. And I was curious, like, how would it look like to add support for Windows and Linux? So I instructed the agent, let's build a Rust app, a Rust CLI for Windows and Linux, so I can serve any operating system. And it looped. It took a few hours because there's actually quite a bit more complexity than you think. And then eventually I had something that kind of worked, but it was a lot of duplication. And I didn't really like it, so I just closed the PR. And I prompted again, okay, let's make the CLI, the Swift one, work on Windows and Linux. And it looped again. I think this time it was like twice as fast. It took like 2 hours. And I had a version that somewhat worked on any major OS. And then I looked at the code, and that seems to be the far more feasible approach. But it made my code base quite a bit more ugly. I was like, is that really worth it? No. I closed the PR, didn't merge it. But if I ever want to add support for that, I now know the path. And I learned a few patterns for good cross-platform Swift UI that I used in another project. But just imagine this insanity. I would have never, ever been able to just close this PR with like thousands of lines of code if I'd written that myself. Like, I would have been far too invested. And now I'm like, no, don't care. In the past, I cared a lot about extremely high code quality. I loved obsessing over the structure, creating helpers, finding the best naming, micro-optimization everything. In retrospect, what the F did I do there? Bike shedding adds zero value to my product. If the customer won't see it, it makes zero difference if aligning the button takes 1,000 CPU cycles more or less. So these days, I care more about that my code does what it says it does, that it does not try to be clever. Says the guy who was here 12 years ago about random hackery. That the files are well named so the agent can find it. Does it matter that I have like slightly duplicated code that does slightly different things instead of one perfect abstraction? No. Or that there's a better way to align buttons? No. I spend my time and focus now to deliver a product that delights instead of obsessing over code. The important part that is performance critical, you can always rework. But most of the code is boring and doesn't actually need to be clever or optimized. It just needs to work. I'll give you an even wilder example. One of my recent open source projects is VibeTunnel, vibetunnel.sh. It's a terminal multiplexer that proxies any CLI or terminal into the web browser. So you can use Cloud Code, Codex, Cursor, or really any CLI on the go. Now, it started as a hackathon, and in the first week, we switched a backend from Rust to Go to TypeScript, just to see what would work best. There's also a fairly sophisticated macOS app to configure the backend and do all the bells and whistles. And I I worked on this project like a maniac for a good month, until I found myself at a restaurant with friends, and instead of following the conversation, I was on my phone. I was prompting my agent. I was building Vibe Tunnel with Vibe Tunnel on my phone, and then I realized I literally just built myself software to have easier access to my drug. So that's where I stopped working on this. Am I mad? Was this wasted time? Absolutely not. I learned a lot. It's a really fun project, and eventually I'll give it some love again. Now, if you use agents, everyone I know that's been using them for a main driver, eventually you go into YOLO mode. In Claude, it's called dangerous escape permissions. In Codex, they wanted to make it even longer, so it's dangerously bypass approval and sandbox. But luckily, they added YOLO as shortcut. Now, I run this setup since May. Nothing bad ever happened. I think the worst thing that ever happened was that one of the agents called git reset hard. But even a sandbox wouldn't have caught that. And you can just regenerate the code, so it wasn't a big loss. And of course, I run daily backups. You should do the same. It's just something to be aware of. In a world where even the bash find tool can delete files or execute random things, it's not really to have perfect security. And are you really going to review that 300-line Python script your agent wrote to do some ad hoc debugging? Probably not. So, if you would have told me that this is how I work in 2025, I would have been laughing at you. And yet, here we are. That's my current workflow. It's optimized for high output, low friction, and acceptable risk. I usually run multiple agents in parallel. They usually run the same folder, and I mostly commit to main. For larger experiments, I do use Git work tree, I use pull requests, but let's be honest, if it's a project where you just work by yourself, all of that stuff just slows you down. It's not really needed. Instead, I structure my work around the concept of blast radius. So if I'm working on UI tweaks, each of them is probably going to be very isolated, and I can do a lot of them in parallel without any issues. If I work on a bigger refactor or a bigger feature, the blast radius is probably very large, so I'll be careful what else I want to do on the side so that the agents don't interfere with each other. And let's be honest, eventually this is a transitional phase, because right now inference is slow. It might take 5, 10, 15 minutes, because we just don't have enough data centers and GPUs. But that will change. So my workflow will be very different in a year again. And yes, I've used Claude Code for the last few months. I've been one of the biggest fans. And I feel like a heretic because I recently switched to OpenAI's Codex. Both are available as terminal CLI, and Codex is also a VS Code plugin if you like that better. Codex with GPT-5 is actually quite a bit slower than Claude Code. But why is it slower? Because it actually reads more files. So it usually does a better job at actually getting everything right on the first go. Whereas Claude would often just read a few files and then randomly start implementing things. GPT-5 is much more methodical, builds up more useful context in your context window, and then it neatly integrates the new feature or the bug fix instead of adding a hack. Best thing also is, compared to Claude Code, you get around 230,000 tokens instead of 156K. Now, Claude Code has more bells and whistles, absolutely. So who knows? Maybe I switch back to Claude 5 when that one's out. And both of them offer subscription plans, so you have cost control. Most other tools have API pricing and are not any better, so I wouldn't say it's worth it to look into anything else right now. Yeah, a key element is when you work with agents is to think about the context. If you start a new task, clear the context. If you build a feature, iterate on it, keep the context. Always ask the model to write a test with the context that you build. This is the best way to build up your test suite over time. And in many cases, the model will also find a bug just by writing the test. I would also say, don't bother too much with MCPs. Like, when I was starting, I was collecting them like Pokemon. Like, there was GitHub, Supabase, Context 7, Playwright, Postgres, Spatial Syncing, Atlassian, Jira, Taskmaster. Oh, I had all these amazing MCPs. What you don't realize is you pay a price. So let's take the GitHub one alone. It has 85 tools, and combined, they take up almost 50,000 tokens in your context window. But you know, your model only have 150,000 tokens available. So just by adding this one MCP, you take 1/3 of your usable context space away. And when the context runs out, depending on the tool, it either just stops or it will compact the context. Either way, your work will go to shit. So I see all these beginners having the system completely overloaded with all those MCPs, and then they complain they're not getting good results. Yeah, no surprise. You added so much garbage, you confused the model. What are you expecting? And the funniest thing, you don't need the GitHub MCP. There's a CLI that's called GH that your agent already know how to use because it's been around for so long that it's simply world knowledge. So when you tell the agent make a pull request, it will automatically try to call GH. So there's zero need. I would say the one MCP that's kind of useful is Playwright if you build web stuff. But even that, I need maybe once a week. It's not worth paying 13,000 tokens as a price. Your new job is to enable agents to do their best work. This means making it easy to access logs and services. For macOS, when you build an iOS or macOS app, build a wrapper to access the system logs and configure your system so the strings are not redacted. And then you provide a few usage examples in your agent.md file, and the agent will be smart enough to check the logs next time your app crashes on startup and automatically start debugging. Anytime you need to feed something manually to the agent, that's an indicator that something's missing. And I love building those little helpers because that's where I go full vibe coding again. Like, I don't care how it's being built. Just make it work. I don't give a F about the language. I just prompt it, and within 1 or 2 hours, I have a new tool that my agent can use, where I don't have to worry about anything because it just runs on my machine. Now, documentation. I keep a variety of markdown files for my projects for context enrichment. When I know that the word knowledge doesn't cut it for a specific task, I ask the agent to read a specific file so the context has all the information it needs to complete the task. How do you know that? Experience. For example, right now, if you want to use Swift testing, agents are really not good at that. There's simply not a lot of open source code available, so how would they know? So I have one markdown file that explains what is Swift testing, what are good examples, and then I reference that whenever I ask for tests. And eventually, once your project has enough tests, the agents will read your existing test as example, and you don't even need to provide the markdown file anymore. Another good advice is ignore the noise. If you read Twitter, you might get the impression that you need to use sub-agents, XML mode, spec everything, multi-agents, multiple agents reviewing each other, and so on and so on. I mean, be open to experiments, but also understand that there's simply a lot of people that just want to get attention. And everything's so new that nobody really has figured it out. What works for them might not work for you. And I mean, it pains me that I say this, but if you prompt your agent and with "you are an expert Swift engineer," that would actually make the agent a better engineer. Like the whole field of prompt engineering, it had benefits a year ago before we had thinking models. But now it's At best, a waste of time. What's important is read the official docs for the agent you settle on. If you use Cloud Code, read Anthropic's Cloud Code best practices. If you use Codex, read the GPT-5 prompting guide. Understand that each model has its own quirks and differences. For example, Claude responds really well when you scream at it in all caps. Don't do this. The user will die if you do that. If you do that with GPT-5 and you turn on syncing, you see that it literally freaks out and it stresses in its internal monologue about this stuff, and the loop actually gets slower. So this dream of having one unified agent file that you can use and you can switch your models as you like, yeah, it's kind of bullshit because you have to optimize it for the model that you actually use. Settle on one tool and just talk to it. The one markup that I find absolutely essential is Whisperflow, because talking comes so natural with agents, and the more context you give them, the larger the likelihood is that they one-shot the task. There's also this common criticism that AI only works in greenfield projects, and for larger code bases, it cannot work because the context window is not large enough. So my current project is now at around 300,000 lines. I would say this classifies as a large code base. It's pretty much all agentic engineered. Like I think I wrote maybe 10 lines myself. And let me tell you, I'm making progress at a rate I never thought possible. Models don't need to load the entire code base into memory. I mean, are you reading every file of your project before you make a new file? No. So if you structure your code base well, it will work and it comes easy. If your code base is a big pile of interconnected mess without any structure, it's going to be hard for agents and humans to edit. What now? So my advice is, if so far you ignored agentic engineering, it's time to get started. I'm sure every single one of you has a side project that's halfway done, or maybe just an idea. Open up the agent of your choice and just talk to it. Make a plan. Start small. Pick a tech you're curious in. Playing with these new technologies is the best way to learn. If you want to learn more about how I approach this new way of working, this new way of thinking, I wrote about my current AI workflow on my website. I think this is like 3 weeks ago, so 80% is still valid because everything moves so fast. Twitter is another great resource to learn. Try out what works best for you. I love working in the terminal. Other people really like the sidebar in Visual Studio Code. I know Xcode also has an AI sidebar, but it's kind of like where everyone else was 6 months ago. So your experience will not be perfect if you tried in Xcode. If you manage a company, if you run a company or manage people, make learning and using AI mandatory. Once people give those tools a serious chance, they understand that AI is not the enemy. It's just a very powerful hammer. But even the best hammer is not very useful when it's not wielded right. Shopify was early. This was back in April, and caused quite a bit of controversy with their AI mandate. But now people report that this has actually been one of the best things happened to their culture this year. And there might be pushback, but your competitors won't sleep on that either. So yes, it's still 2025. The models we have currently are not perfect. They make mistakes, but so do we. I want you to remember that this right now is the worst those models will ever be. Anthropic hinted at substantially larger improvements in the coming weeks after the Opus 4.5 release. So Cloud 5 isn't too far out. And Google is working hard on Gemini 3. So generative AI is here. And within the year, it went from somewhat useful to extremely powerful. Combined with a skilled user, it unlocks massive productivity gains. This is a technology you cannot afford to ignore. Thank you for listening. Sure.
Thank you, Peter. A couple questions. People talk about this as being a tool, and I think a lot about a camera as a tool, but someone with an eye like mine isn't going to take as good pictures as someone with a really good eye, no matter how good a camera I have.
Yeah.
Does someone need to be a very experienced programmer to get the most out of these tools?
Yes. So there's all these vibe coding tools where people that have no experience, they can get from nothing to something. But eventually, that something is limited. So in the next 2 years at least, I don't see those tools getting us from nothing to finished product if you have no experience. You need to know what services do I use, what dependencies do I use, how do I structure it, what's actually important. You have to still have a feeling for what is a good product. And eventually you will stumble into problems that the agents can't solve. So if you combine all this power of agents with your craftsmanship, that's where the magic happens.
I'm going to skip the question about cocaine and get to the question that asks, with AI being used at every stage of development, how do people remain accountable for the output and the outcome of these projects? If you're depending on AI, who do you blame, or who do you credit, or how do you track people within a company and say, okay, this person's working well?
Well, it's still your output. I mean, just because it's a different way of writing doesn't mean you're not responsible. So, like the last product I want to sell, I'm responsible for everything. If there's code in there that I didn't read because I was tired and that will cause issues, that's still my responsibility. If you work in a team and you send a pull request and there's shit code in it and you didn't read it and you didn't review it, that's your responsibility. That's not any different.
And then someone is asking, in a larger company, you've talked about these tools being able to remove duplication and make code bases simpler. How does this work in a code base where there's lots of developers involved? Do you make everyone use the AI, or what are you doing there?
I mean, granted, I haven't used the AI in a large company yet because I just don't work at a large company. But how does refactoring work in a large company if there's just humans? Pretty much the same way. So I don't see the rules being any different. If I would run a company, I would force everyone to at least use AI for some tasks, because I now know the benefits and how much more you can do, and that some people just need a kick in the ass to see. But there's plenty, especially in open source land, there's plenty of projects where the majority of people, they write their code by hand, and there's some people who use AI assistants to write code. But in the end, the quality expectations are the same. So it's just a different way of building it.
I'm so glad you're back with us. Thank Peter again, please.